Voice Project since the 8th grade. She just finished her junior year at Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Lexington, Kentucky, and she's going to represent our student voice here today. And Alan Richard is a veteran education writer and communication advisor for nonprofit organizations. He currently serves on the board chair of the nonprofit Rural School and Community Trust. All of our panelists have more lengthy bios on the website that you can review. But we wanted to get started with our conversation. So let's go ahead and begin. I'll start with, I'm a journalist in Idaho, and most of what we cover is rural education. And we recently commissioned a survey in Idaho, and you can see it on my website, idahonews.org. We did a survey, it's called The People's Perspective, and we surveyed about 1,000 Idahoans and asked them 60-some education questions. We kind of came out with 6 key highlights, but one of the things that was pretty shocking for us was that rural residents are much tougher critics of regular public schools in Idaho. They are less likely than suburban or urban parents to recommend their school districts to families looking for top-notch schools. Alan, would you like to start our conversation today by giving us maybe 3 major conclusions of your most recent report, the Rural Schools Matter, which is yet to be released, I understand.
That's right. So, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks everybody for coming all the way to Washington, D.C. So I'm going to set the stage for our discussion, and I know many of you in the audience, I'm a former education week person. I write occasionally for the Hechinger Report. Formerly worked at the Southern Regional Education Board in Atlanta. So that's my background. I also come at rural issues honestly, even though I live in Washington, D.C. now. I was telling Tim I'm a country mouse turned city mouse. I'm originally from rural South Carolina, and I didn't have the education opportunities that I needed. And then when I became a journalist in South Carolina and then at the national level, I soon found out that I had it pretty good, and a lot of kids were in really desperate situations. So I chair the board right now as a volunteer for the Rural School and Community Trust, which is a nonprofit organization based in Washington. We're small but sleek. The website is ruraledu.org. And in 2 weeks, we're going to put out our biennial report on rural education. It's a 50-state report that ranks the states on a number of measures. And if you'll come get my card afterward, I'll be glad to send you a copy of it. The report's called Why Rural Matters. And it looks at demographics of poverty, student achievement, graduation rates, college and career readiness, and all sorts of things like that. One thing to keep in mind is the data in the report is slightly dated just because of the research process that's involved, so just FYI. But I'm going to set the stage for kind of our conversation about rural issues. Rural is hot. Who would imagine that, right? Obviously, rural voters helped put President Trump into office, and so there's more media interest in rural issues. Erica Green with the New York Times is here at the conference somewhere, and I talked to her the other day, and that's the first time I talked to rural with a national reporter besides me, and Emily with American Radio Works, who's doing a documentary. But normally that's not a usual thing. But I would just say that many rural students, while many rural students come from white, working class, or poor families who fit the bill for Trump voters, if you will, some students do not. There are many rural children of color, immigrant kids, and there are very high poverty rates among rural minority kids. In my view, the most undercovered story in America is the vast inequalities that many rural children face. So I'm going to hit 3 quick overall points. One is that, and this is all based from our report, one is that rural students matter, and there are data that play that out. And so I'll tell you about that in a second. 2, rural students are changing demographically like the rest of America in a lot of places. And 3, resources are still a major problem in most rural communities. We hear a lot of talk in philanthropy these days about equity, but there is no equity without adequate resources. And if you visit many rural communities in our country, the inequities compared to urban and suburban schools are readily apparent. It's nothing less than an emergency for some students in rural areas in our country. So first, why rural matters? Rural students matter. And why do rural students matter beyond being important human beings? Well, there's a lot of them. 8.9 million students attend rural schools in the U.S. 8.9 million. That's more than the enrollment of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and the next 75 largest school districts in the country. Yet there's little national media attention traditionally and private interest in rural America. More than 1 in 4 schools in America are rural. And most people, the reason they don't get rural issues is because they don't get to rural America. You might not realize that half of the rural school districts in 23 states have enrollment under 485 students. Very small communities. Most people in Mississippi haven't been to the Mississippi Delta. Most people who live in Alaska haven't been to the bush. Most people in Texas have never been to rural West Texas or the valley on the border. There are many faces of rural. Rural isn't just in mostly rural states. Half the nation's rural students live in 10 states. The largest rural enrollments are in Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and even Virginia just across the river here. At least half of public schools are rural in 13 states. Achievement, and Tim's going to talk about the benefits of rural schools and the enormous potential in many rural communities. Achievement isn't half bad for rural students. In fact, on the 2013 NAEP, rural results were similar to suburban kids overall. In 2013, in 4th grade math, rural students were 1 point below suburban students and higher than those in a town or urban area. Similar results in reading. If you want small schools, if you want personalized learning, rural America has them. But there's still major concerns in achievement in many rural areas. The lowest rural NAEP results are generally in New Mexico, Mississippi, Alabama, Hawaii, and Louisiana. And when it comes to advanced courses, rural advanced placement enrollment rates look good in some states and terrible in others. The majority of rural students in Ohio take AP courses, while only 5% of juniors and seniors in Louisiana take rural courses. So rural matters. Then number 2, rural schools are changing like the rest of America. Lots of demographics change. Those of you in the Midwest and Heartland, you see this every day. 85% of rural students in New Mexico are students of color. That's the highest rate in the U.S. New Mexico also has the highest low-income rate for students in the U.S., 80%. The majority of rural students identify as non-white in several states, including California. So third, resources. Resources are a major problem. There's no equity without them. School funding court cases continue in Kansas, South Carolina, Mississippi, Washington State. Per student spending on rural students ranges tremendously across the country. In Idaho and Oklahoma, per student spending for rural kids is less than $4,400 each. In Alaska and New York, they spend about $12,000 per student in rural areas. Educator pay is lower than rural educator pay is lower than for their peers in other areas. although it's often a challenge to find and keep quality educators in rural areas. The lowest pay for rural educators is in Kansas and Arkansas. Cal will talk more about this. So I'll wrap up by just giving you, I'm sorry I'm sweaty, I was like searching for this building. So, and I get excited. So I was going to just wrap up by saying here are the top 10 overall top 10 overall states in our priority ranking for rural schools needing attention. Number 1 in our report is Mississippi, and then the rest of the top 10 is Arizona, Alabama, South Carolina, South Dakota, Georgia, Nevada, Florida, Oklahoma, and Alabama.
You said Alabama twice?
Did I say Alabama twice? I sure did. Oh my gosh, I'm leaving somebody out. Let me see. Yeah.
Alan, when you're talking about your report,
Alaska is number 10, sorry.
I'm from Idaho, and though the academic achievement is similar in rural and urban areas, the go-on rate of rural students is much lower in Idaho. So we've been looking at that. Catherine, you have 100 years of research you've studied on rural education, and I know that teacher shortage and infrastructure are big common themes. Is that sort of accurate in how you research things?
Yes, so my name is Catherine Biddle. I'm actually at the University of Maine, though I think in December I often wish I was at the University of Miami. I study the well-being of rural communities and schools in the context of 21st century social and economic change. Because I don't think that you can talk about, I think as Alan was saying, how rural schools are doing without talking about how rural communities are doing overall. Because in rural areas, schools are often the only social institution, and they reflect very much what's happening within the community. So it's really impossible to talk about those two things separately. So I work on a lot of different projects that relate to that interconnection, but one of the things that I've been working on over the last couple of years has been this 100-year literature review, looking at how our perspective on rural education has changed over the course of the century. And I think what's really interesting is that while we used to talk about these issues a lot more, around, from 1900 to 1940, rural education was the hot ticket in education, the hot thing to talk about. And it was definitely the focus of most education reformers within the context of trying to roll out the kind of modern school that we see today. Because we used to have, a lot of disconnected one-room schoolhouses. We had a lot of issues with, trying to staff those, trying to modernize those. And so once that project was more or less seen to be achieved, the attention to rural education went way down. But what I think is really interesting, and I brought this quote today because I think it highlights this pretty well, is that the things that we talk about when we talk about rural schools today, we talk about the problems of rural schools today, haven't changed much. So this was written in 1910 by an urban education reformer named Henry Dewey, and he wrote, "The challenges of the rural school consist of a lack of carefully trained teachers, poorly constructed schoolhouses, insufficient equipment, annual or semi-annual change of teachers, enrollment too small for best results, many grades and small classes, limited social opportunities for teachers, inconvenient boarding places for teachers or housing, teachers not in touch with the life of the community, and a community not vitally interested in the schools." And I think we hear a lot of those narratives today. And in fact, the National Rural Education Association released their top 10 priorities for rural education research last year, and a lot of them were things that were on that list. So I think it begs the question of, have we really addressed any of these issues in the last 117 years? And if not, are we thinking about rural education reform in the way that we need to be? Is the discourse of education reform in this country doing rural schools a disservice by not thinking about their unique needs? I also think that it suggests that, when we think about these issues of teacher recruitment and retention, right? We think about these in a very siloed way. and we have these ready-made solutions that we keep deploying over the century. We're going to grow our own, we're going to offer incentives, we're going to offer student loan repayment plans, we're going to do all these different things, and we just keep deploying these programs over and over and over in different places. And I think what's hard about that is that sometimes those things work in some places at some times, depending on the will of the community, the resources of the community, the alignment of the education reform structures in a particular state. And there's no silver bullet for these issues, which I think is not something that policymakers really want to hear, but is very much, I think, an important thing to consider in the context of rural education reform. So.
I like what you referenced there. Silver bullet, it's not always throwing money at it either. It's a lifestyle challenge for these teachers, where there's less social life, less places to live in some of the larger communities, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, pay's only part of it. There's also the lifestyle. Tim, so you're a superintendent in a rural community, so a practitioner here on our panel. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges you face.
I don't know where to start. You have so many challenges, but it's like everything else. I mean, when you put it into perspective, then you have a better understanding. I think one thing that's helped me is because I'm a lifelong learner, and I've also was schooled in that area, in the same high school, so I know the community, right? So I think that's an advantage that I have because I know these challenges and I've known them for a long time. I guess in my role as superintendent, though, it's kind of changed because now I'm like the biggest advocate for kids that we have, or I feel like we have in our schools at this point in time, because I want to make sure that the opportunities that our kids have are the same ones that they have in other areas of the state. Like schools, wherever, the more rich districts that have got a lot more opportunities, I want to make sure that our kids are afforded those same. So I don't know if I answered the whole question or not. So that gives me an idea a little bit about, gives you a little bit of idea about kind of the personality behind my leadership role as superintendent, because I take it very seriously. It's one of those things that I know because I went there, and I remember what it was like when I left our community. It had such a bad reputation 30 years, well, not 30 years ago, let's say 20 years ago when I went to college. It had such a bad reputation. I remember walking into a classroom and sitting there, and like a lot of the old professors used to do, is they'd sit there and they'd go through and they'd call your name off, and you'd go and you'd have to tell them where you're from. So I went in and I was sitting there, and the professor says, Bobrowski, that's not a Eastern Kentucky name. I said, no, sir, it's not. And then as he went on through the line, he just the only thing they could remember was the bad things that happened back in the 70s and the 80s there, right? It was the heavy marijuana growth, and it was everybody was on drugs and all that, which again is similar to what you're saying now. A lot of the demographics haven't changed, except that we're now losing more kids than we're gaining and have for the last decade. So that's a troubling statistic that I have to deal with as superintendent, because that's our main funding stream. So it's very difficult as one of those challenges.
Well, we're fortunate here to have a student joining us, Sahar, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what students have to say about their rural education.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being out here, and especially at such an early time. My name is Sahar Mohammed Zeta. I'm currently a rising senior in high school in Kentucky, and I'm here representing the Pritchard Committee Student Voice Team. So we are a nonprofit organization based from the Pritchard Committee, and we have over 100 students ranging from middle school all the way to those who have just graduated from their undergraduate years in college. One of our main goals is to amplify student voices when it comes to education decision-making and policy. Ironically, everything that we do in the education system is for the students, but most times students are the ones that are not represented, especially when making important decisions. We like to say that we spend 35 hours a week in the classroom alongside every teacher and administrator. Really, we know what policies are working and what doesn't, and the implementation of them is such a crucial aspect. And sometimes you can see that the intent of policy doesn't always play out in the classrooms. One of my major roles here is not to only speak on behalf of the Student Voice Team, but be the mouthpiece, as I like to say, for all the other rural Kentucky students that I have been working with. Currently, I am the chair of the Post-Secondary Committee, and our major work right now is seeing what major barriers and obstacles are withholding students in Kentucky, most notably in rural education systems, from making the transition from high school into college. We know that we don't represent every single student on the student voice team, and that's why one of our major initiatives is to go out to different schools all across the state and speak to these students. I mean, you would be amazed at what treasure troves they can unearth simply by sitting with them and having a 10-minute conversation. These individual students and their backgrounds can't be captured only by statistics. And we like to say that we're mending the heart and the head in terms of their stories and their narratives and the major facts and stats that have to back them up. Today I've provided with you a little video that shows what we do and gives you a bit of a more context on how we do it. This is one video stream that we have from students from Hart County in Kentucky. And they're speaking about what they think the major troubles are in their education system, especially in these rural schools. So we can play it. It's about a 2-3 minute video that can kind of highlight it. It's the mouse.
Can we turn the line off?
Yeah, that would be
Don't you
great.
know?
And just type in a video. So he says the school's against him.
Can we get it a little louder? Wow.
And agriculture.
Let's start.
Can we see it?
Just
Because you hit benchmark on the ACT, that means
Teachers are biased, how we're unfair, how the school's against us.
school's against you.
Yeah.
Isn't that a little extreme?
No. But no.
Why?
Well, we, for like, whenever we were in there, we have choices in our classes, which are, we are assigned the classes, and then we can choose, and they coincide, great. If they don't, oh well. So, this year, I signed up, or last year for this year, I signed up for 3 welding classes and 1 accounting. That's all I signed up for. I got 2 welding classes, an accounting class, and agricultural science, which I didn't sign up for. So, and
Just because you hit benchmark on the ACT, that means you're ready for maybe not even ready, but just the learning portion of it. But whenever it comes to life in general and having to pay bills and taxes and just stuff like that, no, you're not ready for that. It's not taught. I mean, in Hart County, we don't have anything like a home ec class or anything like that. I mean, we have there's something that Miss Wilson teaches. I can't remember what it was, but only the freshmen can take it. And I signed up for it my freshman year, didn't get it because I thought I was too smart for it. So it's only given to this class is only given to those students who they think is not smart enough for actual electives.
So these classes are supposed to prepare you for college are only being given to the students that they don't think are capable of going to college?
Yeah, basically.
So college readiness, have you heard that phrase before?
Basically, they shove it down your throat here, but they don't tell you what it is. So luckily, Amy and Harry was telling us what it was, but I just don't understand why I have to do it, because some kids here don't even go to college. Like half this town, you get very few that go to college.
Yeah, there's a lot of my friends actually. I mean, they don't even graduate high school because their families are struggling and they need to work on the farm, or they might graduate high school, but it's as far as they get before they go
summarize the three main things that we're hearing from all over the state is that students that do feel as if they want to get out of Hart County, for this instance, will want to go towards a post-secondary education. It's much more than just an education. Another student named James told me how leaving a county is much more than just wanting to go to college. It's about leaving your entire family, leaving your entire culture, and realizing that in most cases, you're not gonna ever see your family again because you're seen as a traitor in their community from leaving what they have to offer. On the other end of the spectrum, we have other students telling me about how they're not being given what they need. For example, these schools have amazing resources, like John said, for agriculture, for other farming classes, and all these career pathways that are the most prominent in their schooling environment. But if they want to go to something, say accounting, other sciences, STEM programs, the resources can be lacking and very difficult for students to get out of this pathway, especially in this resource that they think that they'd be able to contribute to most. And finally, we're seeing the accountability standards that are being set up aren't being put through as intended. In the last year in Kentucky, the only standard needed for a student to be deemed as college ready was a simple ACT score. You had to meet benchmarks and that was it. And we have students going to college now in Kentucky, and about 2/3 of these undergraduates are dropping out within their first year, even though they've been deemed as college ready by the government. So we're seeing some mismatches between accountability and how they're actually being executed. The ACT was supposed to give opportunities to students to think, oh, college might be an option for me. But we're seeing it's more of an obstacle now than what it is to open up some different pathways.
Great, thank you. We are going to save about 20 minutes at the end for you to ask questions if you have questions of any of our panelists. But first, I wanted to touch on, and I'm a journalist, and so watching this reminds me, and hopefully all of you, that you need to talk to kids when you do your stories. They certainly can give you some revelations as you're reporting. But one thing that I've learned talking to kids is though we talk about this critical situation rural schools are in, actually there's quite a few benefits of being in a rural community. For one, they feel safe. The class sizes are small, your classes, your graduating class is maybe 10 people. You feel safe, you feel connected, and you feel like people care.
Good. For rural students, they're comparable in many cases to suburban kids overall. But, like I said, small schools. You want small schools? Rural's got them. You want personalized learning? Rural's got it. Tim can speak to that firsthand.
Yeah, in
What's your
Idaho,
favorite?
I'm a reporter in Idaho. Most of our school districts are the largest employer in the community. So I know, Catherine, you wrote recently about the economic driver in rural schools. Does that mesh with that theory?
Yeah, I think that schools can be an incredible asset to rural communities, not just in the sense of, that the human capital development that we then send off to other places to get jobs other places and not come back, but also in the sense of developing, from an economic standpoint, the community that's right there. And I think there's a lot of different ways that schools can do that. I think there's a lot that can be done on the kind of, like what I would call triage side, in terms of like when you have a community that's in crisis because of economic decline, rising opioid use, some of the other problems that we talked about, the school can serve as a hub for social services. The school can serve as a place where people can access mental health, where they can access other types of financial services or financial planning services. There's a lot that can be done. And I'm not saying that we should put more, on Tim's plate, in terms of what he has to organize, but I do think that there's an important role that entrepreneurial educational leaders can play in terms of connecting those very fragmented services in rural areas. But then there's also a lot that can be done on the growth side. And I'm so glad that Sahar is here actually, because I think youth are in an incredible position to do community organizing within their communities around, giving back to the community. If we teach youth that, the importance of their education is it's extractive, right? That it's for them and that they take it wherever they go, then it becomes something that's very individualized. But if we teach youth that part of your education is giving back to your community and developing your community, there's a lot that can be done. Students can do different kinds of entrepreneurial projects. They can do different types of community service projects. I think there's a lot that can connect the school to the community in ways that serve both student learning and community development.
Tim, I did an article about rural students had higher attendance than the urban, though their scores were pretty similar, but they had such higher attendance. And so we went and talked to a superintendent about they're in a position where if Johnny doesn't show up, they can go to their home that morning and check on him. Do you see that in your district?
Every day. I think, again, one of the advantages that we have in small rural districts is that we know the kids and their families, and the kids and the families know us. Whereas in large communities, in large school communities, we should say, it's not as prevalent. So when we have to go and talk to the parents and or grandparents, which we're seeing a huge shift of in terms of challenges now, raising kids, they know us, and it's not like we're a stranger when we show up at the door. Now, when I was the director of people personnel, when I would do this, I would pretty much take my tie off because I knew that from a rural background, a tie can be intimidating. I never thought about that until I really did a lot of research and Ruby Payne's readings and those things that happened many years ago. But it really made a lot of sense and it hit home because I knew what might unintentionally intimidate folks, and therefore they wouldn't open up to me. So it was something that you learn as you go. Something that we did this year I thought was really good to reduce some barriers is we had all of our teachers go and visit all of our kids at their homes before school started, which I thought was awesome because they never had done that. Because sometimes we presume that everybody knows each other, but that wasn't the case. So I think it's very important that rural schools continue to foster that relationship with their students, not just in the school, but also in their communities. And it's been something that we're constantly struggling with, getting parents to show up for school meetings. We struggle with that, and it probably happens in a lot of places. And, when you're in a highly impoverished area, why we need to be there, what am I going to do? It's just like the impetus for what's going on with education is really grounded in the population that we deal with, and the answer is probably not. So that's a big challenge for us that we have to deal with, but it's something that we take wholeheartedly, and we want to make sure that we try to reach out to our parents as much as possible. Therefore, we have really made a big push in the last couple of years to go with social media. So it's been a big help for us to communicate with parents. Every parent we know of has got a cell phone, and they've got Facebook. Guarantee it. That's one thing, going back to research, they have got the entertainment, right? So we try to take advantage of that in our school setting so that we can continue to communicate with our parents the best we can.
So, Sahar, and then we'll follow up with the rest of the panelists. We're this room full of journalists. So what stories would you like reporters to pay more attention to? What stories should we be doing that matter or could affect positive change?
So this entire work that we've been doing, these are just a few stories that we've heard so far. And each individual, each school, or even every single public policy science cannot describe what students need. And what we're seeing throughout the entire focus of it is that these stories is just put simply, talk to more students. It should be self-evident in the education system, but there's so much hidden under the surface, and students are the ones that are able to uncover all of those hidden attributions. A lot of the things that we think are secondary in the education system, like culture, home lives, families, really prevail over academics in a non-debatable way. We have students that are going home and working and taking care of their younger siblings when their parents are absent. They're not captured by the education system. So when you're going through and talking to schools, don't only interview or ask teachers or administrators, and most importantly, don't talk to the students that the teachers are really putting forward in the spotlight. Well, from our experience, the students that have the least to say within the classroom have the most moving and telling stories. So dig deep because they are there. Whenever we're talking through them, we spoke to students that were taking care of their siblings, working full night shifts, and then coming to school and then not meeting accountability standards, but they have the grit. It's just not matching up. We have students from Owen County that were saying that drug addiction problems is huge in their schools. And we walked through it and we saw, Dick lying on the floor. And teachers and administrators do nothing about it. And it's these stories that really need to be highlighted, especially in terms of mental health that's been lacking in different areas of rural schools. Other stories that can be highlighted is the lack of policy connection between major cities like Frankfurt, which are the hub of all the education policy, and their disconnect with their students. We like to go in and lobby all the time with these legislators, and and we try to give them information what's going on in these schools, and they're like, oh yeah, I had a child in the education system once. And I was like, it's not the same. There's a lot of disconnect that can only be harnessed together with the power of both numbers and student voices. And it's that simple. Talk to us. We're never given an opportunity or a formal platform to voice these opinions. And when we do, it's amazing what treasures you're going to unearth.
Does anyone else on our panel, if you could pick one story idea you'd like a journalist in here to cover, is there something that comes to your mind, Catherine?
I guess what I would say is that I think that I would echo what Sahar said, which is it's not just about the school. I think these rural community stories are education stories, if that makes sense. Like rural homelessness is an education story. The opioid crisis is an education story. And I think it's important to cover those aspects as well.
Alan, in your research?
Well, just like I said earlier, I think the most undercovered story in America is the inequality, the obvious inequalities that some of our rural students across the country face. All you have to do is spend an hour in a school or talk with a family, and it hits you in the face. It's completely apparent. I mean, I visited a county-wide school system in Mississippi 2 years ago. They're so broke, the superintendent has stopped taking a salary. They've never even thought about AP courses. So, I just think the inequality, it's glaring, and I don't think people really understand what's out there. And there's also, I was going to mention, there's a lot of immigrant kids in rural America in different parts of the country. Like I said, majority of rural students in California are identify as non-white. And so I think that's something that.
And when you talk about inequities in Idaho, just the facilities alone are so obvious. The large schools have the giant gyms and cafeterias, and in the smaller school they've been using the same facilities for 60, 70 years. They just don't even have the tax base to increase their facilities. So we'd like to open it up to questions. And if you just tell us who you are and where you're from and your question would be great. Why don't you start?
Well, I was going to say, before you start too, just a reminder to sign in, and it's important that people sign in as well.
Yeah,
There are
where's
a lot
the
of
sign-up
people
sheet? Is it
going
somewhere?
around. We can get those back
I'll
around.
try it around.
Can I do it?
That's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Juan Elizondo from the National Math and Science Initiative. We work with Advanced Kentucky and proud of the work that they're doing. Both for Mr. Baranski and for Sahar, what response do you get from your communities in terms of STEM education, and what education do you have to do with your community leaders, your parents, to get them to support STEM education?
It's really interesting that you say that. I'm part of a STEM program in an urban Kentucky setting. So for me, STEM education has always been something that's been highlighted and very valuable. So when I go out to these rural Kentucky settings and see what they have to say, it's really eye-opening for me, especially when it's not seen as something that's valuable. What we're seeing in a lot of community members that the students can be interested in these areas, and they are, but in terms of the resources available to them for these STEM educations, they don't see the value in it. Their parents and their community members most definitely don't see the same value in it. When Alan, you were talking about AP classes and how they're not very big, most especially in the STEM area, when we surveyed the students and asked, are you willing to take a STEM AP class? And the majority of them said no because they simply didn't want to. They didn't see it as a very open or a possible path for them, especially in the communities that they're seeing. So in terms of promoting those areas in more rural Kentucky schools, I think a major option would be to just have conversations with the teachers and the students and the parents and show them that this is a very possible path for them. In most cases, all that they're seeing is there's my school, there's the local factory, there are the local job opportunities, and that's pretty much it. Everything else to them is foreign and mysterious.
Okay, we got a
I'll
question.
follow up that. The issue that we have, which is different than in Lexington, is we have no industry. So it's very difficult for us to come in and really promote the STEM mindset. With the students can't see the end result. They can't see the jobs that are there because they aren't there. So we as a school district have to promote what could be there for you. So we do a lot of college visits. We do a lot of going out and sharing information with each other, and we rely heavily on online learning in our blended classrooms. We do not have a chemistry teacher, We do not have a physics teacher. So when you talk about STEM-related kind of issues, we have to embed that within the curriculum that we have. So it's tough, but we do it, right? We do.
Okay, let's get through.
Peggy Barmore, I'm a freelancer for the Heckins Report. Can you talk a little bit about, this is about education in the era of Trump, that since rural communities voted overwhelmingly for Trump, how his policies are starting to impact your communities, and how are people realizing that what they voted for may be against their
Who's
interest?
the question
It doesn't matter, I mean, for Catherine in part,
I haven't, to be honest with you, at this point, this early in, I haven't seen a big difference yet. And it could be this time next year, but at the point right now, I haven't seen a big issue with us. One thing that we have noted, and that was just some misinformation, was of course the school lunches, which is, that's what superintendents always hear about, right? How bad that was. Well, it come to find out, when the truth finally gets out on the table, it wasn't so much about the negativity that was around Ms. Obama's initiative to try to eat healthier. Kentucky as a state had tougher regulations on food service than what the federal government did. Surprise, right? So we haven't really, I haven't seen that yet, of any negative that's coming out at this point.
Go ahead.
Just two quick thoughts. I was gonna say ESSA. There was an interesting story a couple of weeks ago in Education Week by Daryl Burnett, who's here somewhere, or he's here at the conference. Went to North Dakota, and in terms of ESSA implementation, the new federal education law, it seemed like a free-for-all. Frankly, it was just, and this was true under No Child Left Behind too. There's so many small school systems and small schools that a lot of the policy priorities, including Title II around highly qualified teachers, simply didn't apply. The numbers aren't there. So one thing I would mention is this is not a direct answer to the Trump question, but under ESSA is that, keep an eye on the minimum number of students from subgroups that states are keeping up with and that sort of thing, because again, some of that may not apply, but it's special ed, low income, different racial ethnic groups. And the other thing that I was going to mention in terms of Trump, was just with Secretary DeVos, who is the first education secretary not to come speak to EWA. But I was at her confirmation meeting, and I saw how Susan Collins, Senator Collins of Maine, Senator Murkowski of Alaska, and others really pushed her on rural issues, saying, hey, we're going to help elect this president. What are your plans? She had absolutely no answers. And so that's very concerning that the federal government just seems to be not responding to on rural education.
Okay, let's take a question here.
Actually, to your point, I wonder if the panelists have any thoughts on, in the bigger picture, sort of choice being part of the solution or part of something that really doesn't register for you.
Well, that was actually what I was just about to speak to, which is this issue of choice and vouchers in rural communities. I think that this is what I've been hearing a lot from, I work with principals all over the state of Maine, and I think that they're very concerned with the emphasis that's being placed on choice within school systems that can barely support the number of students that they currently have at the level of service that they currently have. And I think, what we've seen in some states, right, so Maine has a cap on charters, right, so it's a different kind of system than a lot of other places in the country. But what we've seen in like Pennsylvania, for example, is the proliferation of cyber charter schools. And that can have a real hollowing effect on the public school system in a way that is very, very difficult for rural districts to sustain. But what's at stake for those communities is so much more than other places, because if you close a school because you can no longer support it in a rural community to a cyber charter organization, what you're doing is you're closing one of the economic drivers for that community. And so that is like a death sentence, basically, for the community. And I think that's an important thing that has not been thought out, or at least I have not heard any talk of that at the federal level.
Question here?
Jen Smith from the Berkshire in Massachusetts. To that effect, what impact are measures like federal or state push for regionalization and consolidation for rural schools, impacting communities, and quality of education, if anything?
The Rural Trust has done a lot of work on school consolidation in other states over the years, and I wrote about things in my past and consolidation in other states. I would just say look to what's happened in West Virginia. Look to what's happened in Arkansas. The West Virginia has closed hundreds of rural and small town schools over the last 20 years. I think the cost savings are minimal. Transportation costs have soared. It's not uncommon for students to have 2 and even 3-hour bus rides. You know, some communities are very remote, and it doesn't save a lot of money. In Arkansas, as a result of their school finance decisions about a decade ago, several dozen rural school systems were forced to merge with neighboring school systems. And so, like, for example, school systems in the Delta, you know, one small, extremely poor school system merged with the next town over, which may be 10 miles or more, which also is a very poor, small school system. And so now you have one slightly larger, equally troubled school system. In some cases, they could even kept the same, like, assistant superintendent, minimal savings. To me, it's like moving deck chairs.
It sounds like Idaho, 1/3 of our districts have moved to a 4-day school week for cost savings, and it doesn't really save costs, and then the school day's longer. It's difficult, especially for the younger kids, and then they're not seeing any academic success. So it's just a solution that doesn't seem to be working, at least in Idaho. Go ahead.
Hi. I am from New Hampshire, which is, by some statistics, one of the, possibly the second oldest state in the United States now. And one of the things that I've noticed is that tax base tends to not want to support the schools as much because I think arguably because of the fact that they are an aging population, they're disconnected from the schools. And one of my question is, and maybe I can direct this at Alan and Tim if you have something to say as well, is how do you, one of the things we were talking about is disparity of schools. Some school districts have nice schools, some of them are lacking resources. How do you get the tax base to support warrant articles and to support a budget that can sustain the school when they don't really have any desire to support something like that?
I think you have to look at each community locally and see what it's got to offer. If we did I did a study 2 years ago at the impact that a 4% increase at the state level in terms of taxation would create, and it's $15,000. So when you talk about no tax base, I think a lot of folks don't understand rural communities do not have a tax base, which most school funding formulas rely heavily on. In Kentucky, we rely on what's called SEEK. And SEEK, if it's adequately funded, works. But if it's inadequately funded by other factors, such as the local community and the local nickel, as it's referred to, is if you can't get it off the ground and impose it on just a small minority of folks, it's a death sentence for the superintendent and the school board. And nobody wants to go into that fight and that battle for $15,000. So that's the reality.
Any other questions?
Well, can I just add
sure.
quickly, just that, putting my rural trust hat on, that property taxes are a terrible way to fund rural schools. I mean, it introduces inherent inequity, and so you can't. And there's not a tax base, much to tax in many cases, and there probably won't be, at least not in the very near future. So that's why it's up to states, and that's why in a bunch of states, rural school districts have sued the states for a greater share of resources. And so I mean, it's ridiculous.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Linda Wertheimer. I'm a Boston-based journalist and an author. I also am a graduate of a rural high school in Ohio in the 80s, and this is like such much deja vu. I mean, nothing has really changed. It's very depressing. What I was listening to, so I have some questions about teacher quality. I can think back to the 80s, and I know this is happening now. My school could not hold on to a good math teacher. You know, we went through 4 teachers back in the 80s. You know, and so like I had friends who wanted to be engineers and never got the math they needed. And I heard you mention the AP math, but to me that's even a little bit suspect, because are the teachers you're getting qualified to even teach those courses? So what I'm wondering about, so you have really 2 issues here. One is even getting teachers to come to you. The other is when they come to you, how good are they really? And I know I had like one really great English teacher in college, and that's why I have the career I have. I mean, in high school. So
We, one of our best math teachers that we have at the high school, and you gotta remember, we have 2 math teachers at our high school, okay? One of them is a local girl, and the other one is a retired IBM guy, which we were very lucky to find and to keep, because he's retired, this is his 2nd job. So one thing in Kentucky that I think is very beneficial is the way folks are credentialed to teach does not always force them down the true academic route of going through traditional means of going to colleges, universities, and training. There are others out there, and we have taken advantage of that over the past, and it's worked out really well for us. You know, this gentleman is really great, coaches our academic team, he does our math, you know, and that's what you see a lot of in our areas. I mean, just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you teach one course or one class. You know, my wife is here, and she's a Spanish teacher. She's my media specialist. You know, so, you know, you go on down the line, and it's just basically maximizing the capital that you have to work with. And when she teaches 101 and 102 for our dual credit classes, we don't offer AP in our area. And the reason is, why? How does AP help our kids when you're coming from Allen County? What we have found out, that what is the better route for us and our kids to do is to go the dual credit route. Because the kids are more engaged when you talk about attendance. When you want to get kids, juniors and seniors to school, and if they know they've got college credit hanging over top of them, that's what you want. So, you know, we had our 2nd student graduate this year with her Associates of Arts degree. That's pretty good.
High school diploma at the same time.
And the high school diploma at the same time. So, and it's pretty good from a small rural district that we can offer those services. And it's not uncommon for our kids when they leave our school, high school, to have 30, 36 hours, 40 hours of college, so that when they hit the ground running, we're not getting them ready just for college. We're getting them ready for their master's program. You see what I'm saying?
And for the teachers that we've been seeing across the state, there was one student that told me that they had an amazing Spanish teacher that came in, absolutely phenomenal, from Spain. Only stayed there for about 8 months. When they left, they are now learning Spanish through computer programs, which is not the way you should be learning a language. And what we're seeing is that all of the students think that there's just a lack of connection between them and the teachers. We ask them, would you ever go to a teacher to talk to anything besides school? And they're like, no, there's no way that we would do that. And then the teachers, on the other hand, that we're speaking to say that there's a lack of engagement with the students. We're seeing that there is, on one end, students that really want to pursue an education, but then they're feeling inhibited by, you know, the resources in the community. And the other hand, students that just don't see the value of an education, especially when there are careers available to them right now, and especially those their family needs. So what we're seeing with teachers and their involvement and their lack of staying there is probably seeing this lack of disconnect with them and the students.
I wanted to just interject for a second. I'm not a journalist. I'm a teacher in this district. And one of the things that you showed was the young lady who said a benchmark did not mean you were college ready. We recognized that long ago, and he just touched on how many of our students are taking dual credit courses. We have more high schoolers enrolled in college courses demographically than we do entire county population-wise. So his district, and I'm saying this as a teacher, not as his wife. I work there. So I would say this without the wedding band. His philosophy of whole child, and he always mentions to us when we say we can't do something, he says don't look at it as an I can't, look at it as an obstacle you've got to figure out how to climb over. And so we have harnessed a lot of our resources that we do have. For example, he mentioned our math teacher who was retired IBM. the girl that, and I call her girl because I taught her in school, I've been there that long, I grew up in this community, my children are growing up in this community, this is my home, and so we are very vested in this community. I taught her in school. She is also getting her doctorate right now in mathematics. Okay, so we have teachers getting doctorates, so that culture, that climate is completely changing. We are greatly encouraged to continue our education and our professional development. He's instituted micro-credentialing, which is very personalized professional development. We have 2 teachers who got grants to go back and get national board certification. One is science. She used to be a lab tech in a major hospital in our area. She came back and is teaching our biology courses. So you talk about real world, how do I use this in the real world? She can tell you, show you. And we have another math teacher who is getting board certification. So we have all that going on. But back to the girl who said she wasn't ready for college. We recognized that early on. And Tim even proposed, that's Mr. Borowski, even proposed a grade 13 idea. Okay, so a grade 13 idea where we're a K through 12 district, but we've got students who are failing out as soon as they leave our doors. Benchmarks are met, but they're back home in 3 months. And so we have this grade 13 idea unofficially where we support those students.
Can we just get, is there one more question? Looks like we're wrapping up. Go ahead.
So I'm Anissa Johnson. I'm from Milwaukee, and I cover a primarily urban area, but have a real interest in rural schools. And one of the things that is so remarkable to me about the things that you're saying is how the challenges and the issues confronting rural schools are almost identical to what we see in the urban schools. And it reminds me of what a woman in Milwaukee said to me, that the troubles of black men today will be the troubles of white men tomorrow, right? So can you speak at all to, at least in Wisconsin, can you speak at all to how people are far more compassionate when they look at the issues in rural, which in Wisconsin means white generally, communities, than they are in urban, which in Wisconsin means people of color. There's just a bit more compassion for not blaming the families and the. Can you speak to that at all?
I think that's just where people know, if you know anything at all about rural communities, you know the challenges that are there. And I think that's probably where the compassion comes from, is because they know what those kids have to go through and what they're exposed to. And then when they come out of there, they
But it's
move
the same
on.
in black urban communities.
And that's what you'll find out is, even in going back to Ruby Payne's research, is what you find out in rural, if you're poor, right? The demographics are the same, they're similar, but so is attitudes, right? So it's changing those attitudes, which is tough. But I think overall, to kind of go back to one question previously, if you had a story to focus on, me personally, I would focus on the grit, like you said, because when kids come from these areas, these are the kids, we produce some of the best employees for other folks that you've ever seen. Doctors, lawyers, you go on down the list, welders, it doesn't matter. But when these kids can go through what they go through and can be accomplished, the employers are the ones who come out well ahead. Unfortunately, they leave our areas to go.
Well, thank you all. I don't want to run late. Thank you all for coming, and thank you.